Like, look at how thick this book is. And you know what? It never needed to be that thick. It never needed to be that serious. Today I'm going to be talking about 10 recent books I read, including Palestinian stories, social justice satire, and maybe even just a sprinkle of Omegaverse. What else is new? I think I'm going to try this format where I talk about 10 books at a time instead of doing monthly reading wrap-up videos because it's an even number. It's more books than I usually read in a month, so we'll see how it goes. But I've been reading so many books this year that I feel like the main way I've been relaxing is by either starting a new book or playing games on my phone. Fortunately, for the second hobby, I found a way to earn points and get gift cards from it thanks to today's sponsor, Mistplay. Mistplay is a loyalty app for gamers. It's really great when you're looking for a little help for small purchases like your little Amazon purchases, your daily coffee, or like for many people on my channel, your book purchases. So with Mistplay, you can earn rewards simply by discovering and playing mobile games. And they offer a huge catalog of games too. You got puzzles, you got word games, casual games, card games, strategy games, whatever you can think of. The more you play, the more points you earn. And then you can redeem your points for gift cards like with Amazon, Walmart, Xbox, PlayStation, and many others. Over $100 million in gift cards have already been redeemed. Personally, my girlfriend and I like to play word games before we go to bed, which I know is a very old couple activity, but that's how we relax in the evening, okay? So what's great about Mistplay is that we've discovered the kind of games that we naturally gravitate towards to anyway, and we just happen to get the bonus of having points to redeem. So if you're interested in trying it out, you can go to mistplay.com/withcindy and use my code Cindy100. Or you can click on the link in my description. Either way, this will help you download Mistplay for free. You'll get 200 bonus points for signing up today, but with my code, you'll get an extra 100 bonus points. And that way you'll be even closer to redeeming your first gift card. And now let's get back to the video. Starting with the first book that I read. This is a new release called Poor Dear, and it's about this little girl who has to deal with this tragic loss that happened. But the way that she copes with it is by creating this imaginary world and life in her mind that kind of mimics a fairy tale. This is a lot easier for her to deal with than the actual truth, which was the memory of her friend dying. So while she's processing that in her own imaginary way, on the outside in real life, her mom and that friend's mom are kind of like going back and forth on whether she was responsible for that friend's death or not. But the main girl's just like, la la la, imaginary stories. I ain't gonna think about my dead best friend and how I possibly could have been the reason why she's dead. But what gets in the way is this continuous arrival of this character called Poor Dear. This deer just keeps on showing up. Nobody invited this little bitch, but every time she shows up, she keeps on reminding her, hey, you gotta face the truth. You gotta atone for what you did. The book is basically about the stories that we tell ourselves to make sense of tragedy in our lives. And I picked it up because I wanted to know what the tea was behind what she was trying to repress. Ultimately, it's about understanding and forgiving the inner child within us. Unfortunately, the book didn't hit for me as much as I wanted it to hit, but maybe that's just because I'm dead inside, and like every time my therapist brings up the idea of my inner child, I'm just like, I don't know her. I don't know that bitch. But I'm sure for the right person, it would hit really well. Then the second book that I read was Pushout, and this is a nonfiction book about the criminalization of Black girls in schools. This has been on my to-read list for so long, but I put it off because I knew it would just make me extremely cynical. I mean, more cynical than usual about our education system and the ways that it fails Black girls. And it really does. The book goes into all these statistics about how Black girls make up 16% of female students in the US, and yet they also make up 1/3 of all girls with school-related arrests. So the book really goes into pretty much the fallacies of the different policies and practices that schools in America have, along with the cultural illiteracy that people both in other classmates and educators have towards Black girls. There are so many stigmas and stereotypes that create this pipeline from school to prison, and I really appreciate that the book focused specifically on Black girls because there is a unique dynamic for girls specifically that isn't really talked about as often as boys. I feel like I was pretty much familiar with most of the things covered in this book except for the alarming rate of how often Black girls in schools in the US were constantly not in school because they would get pimped out, and how sex work was such a prominent thing for them. So this book just made me really reflect on the people that I grew up with in school and made me wonder what they were going through. And it also makes me really hope that they are okay now. But other than that, I feel like this book should be required reading for anybody who works in education because the education system that the US is in, complete trash altogether. So I think the more educators that are aware of the systemic issues and possible solutions to mitigate that, the better it is to hopefully have a better future. The third book that I read is The Invocations. This is a witchy thriller that follows 3 teenage girls who are dealing with men or monsters or some combination of the both, and they come together to work towards a common goal to take these demons down. And there's a lot of gore and nastiness along the way, but in a weird way that kind of made it fun to read. This is the same author that wrote House of Hollow, and that book was also kind of like disgusting, but in a feminine, ethereal way, whereas I think Invocations just goes all the way with being disgusting and gory and vomit, and like one of the girls literally smells like crap and is just shitting her pants the entire time because she got cursed by a demon. And she was by far my favorite character in this book because I just love a smelly bitch. We don't really get that often in books. She made a deal with a demon that went wrong, so now she's just cursed forever, and literally like in the middle of the night when she's trying to go to sleep, the demon will just possess her body and just fucking thwack her all across the room. Like, her life is fucking terrible, but she has such a snarky sense of humor that it was just really entertaining to read about her. The other girl that she teams up with later is someone whose sister had been murdered by a serial killer, and she decides to dabble into the occult and magic in order to bring her sister back. And then the third girl that you follow is an actual witch, and she's been selling spells to women to help them out in desperate situations. And so the first two girls I talked about, they come to the witchy girl, and they find out that the witch's former clients are all of these women who end up getting murdered, which means that there's a serial killer out there specifically targeting these women that had spells sold by that witch. Overall, this was just a really fun, gory story that's centered on women. Obviously, with the whole witchiness going on, there are parallels to the ways that women have historically been called witches when they show any sign of power that is a threat to men. I think this is a wonderful young adult book for girls to read, and at the very least, I finally have representation for a nasty, stinky bitch. And then the fourth book that I read is A Victim. This is a satire about a man who, on paper, has pretty much the kind of life story that college admissions and newspaper articles would love to read think pieces about. He was born and raised in Harlem. His dad was a drug dealer who got murdered. He lives with a single mom. His childhood best friend went to prison for gang activity. It comes to a point where he realizes, thanks to his college advisor, that he can talk about this in a way that makes it very appealing to the white gaze, which means that it is very easy for him to get into college if he just writes this tragedy that happens in his life, because all the white allies will just eat it up, send him to college, give him the scholarships that he needs, and then eventually he becomes a writer for this really prestigious magazine. But the thing about him writing about his life experiences is that some of it is kind of exaggerated because he knows what will be appealing to the white audience. And let's be real, the white audience is pretty much the main audience when you are an author. That's why when we read stories by people of color, it's often stories about their trauma. And it got to the point where he would literally just make up events of him being oppressed because he knew that would get the clicks. So I thought it was very interesting to see that perspective from a character of color, because I think oftentimes it's very easy to show a foolish white person that is just grifting their way into the business, as we've seen in real life instances if you've seen my drama videos, and in the case of Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. But what I liked about this book was that the person doing the bad thing is a person of color. That's not to say that this book is so much more nuanced than Yellowface though. I would say that it is kind of similarly surface level. The main character's entire story was just about grifting other people, and I wish that we had gotten more space for his character beyond just conning people. We see the ways that he turns his childhood tragedies into a ticket for success in his adult life, but we don't really see how he actually grapples with those tragedies because it doesn't seem like those tragedies actually affect him. And I think that kind of flattens the character, because how can you not be affected by your father dying or by losing your best friend to prison? The main character obviously becomes morally gray and you could argue unlikable, but I think showing more aspects to his character other than just being a con man would have added more nuance to his journey throughout the story. That being said, I still found it very entertaining to read, and there were actually parts that made me laugh out loud, so I do feel like it hit the spot in terms of it being a satire. I think the first line of the book is great. It starts off with saying, "I wasn't trying to play the victim until the world taught me what a powerful grift it is." And I think if you're someone who is embedded within the internet and how people can often act on Twitter, that quote might resonate with you with how a lot of people operate. The fifth book that I read is The Wishing Game. This is about a young woman who works as a teacher's aide, but ever since she was growing up as an orphan, she found solace in these children's books that's called the Clock Island series, and she shares her love for reading and these books with her students, in particular this one student who is also an orphan like her. Because of how closely she relates to the student and has become well acquainted with him, she really wants to adopt him, but obviously being a teacher's aide, she is barely making any kind of money to have the funds or stability to take take care of a child. So her opportunity to finally get the funds needed to adopt this kid is when she hears about this competition that the author of the Clock Island series is hosting. She becomes one of the 4 contestants who are chosen to compete here at his home on the actual Clock Island, and they will win the one and only copy of the new book that he's writing. And this is a big deal for her because she knows that with this super rare edition of the book, she can sell it and finally make the money that she needs to adopt the kid. The book definitely gives Willy Wonka vibes with how quirky this guy tries to be with hosting this contest with arbitrary rules and gives a bunch of riddles and acts cryptic as fuck. Frankly, if I were in that contest, I would not have the patience for that, but that's probably why I wouldn't be one of the people chosen to participate anyway, because I have no patience for some riddle me this bullshit. I would say if you're looking for a happy and feel-good story, then this is a pretty simple and easy book to read. It doesn't really have high stakes, and it shows a very idealistic depiction of a foster situation, not the real life actual situation of how terrible foster kids are treated. And in a way, that's kind of nice because it gives the escapism that you would want. Personally, it's a little bit too corny and sweet for my taste, but it is nice to see a happy depiction of foster families. The 6th book that I read is The Moon That Turns You Back. This is a poetry collection by a Palestinian author that reflects on memories and archives and family while she is grappling with displacement and war. The themes of displacement were very present throughout this poetry, especially when there are different ways of displacement, not just from your home, but from your family or your gender. And I think capturing those feelings of confusion and grief, especially during a time when your people are facing genocide, was very sobering. So I'll read out loud some of the quotes that I highlighted from a poem called Relapse Dream Ending with My Grandmother's Hands. How I cried during the ectopic and said, we just bought this house. I wanted to be happy in it. And you looked at me strange and said, a good house can carry anguish. And this is how I think of bodies now too. From another poem called Half-Life in Exile. I'm forever living between Aprils. The air here smells of jacarandas and lime. It's sunset before I know it. I'm supposed to rest, but that's where the children live. In the hot mist of sleep, dream after dream. Instead, I obsess. I draw stars on receipts. Everybody loves the poem. It's embroidered on a pillow in Milwaukee. It's done nothing for Palestine. There is nothing more terrible than waiting for the terrible. I promise. Was the grief worth the poem? No, but you don't interrogate a weed for what it does with wreckage, for what it's done to get here. If you liked any of that writing, you should definitely check out the book because it's super short. I basically read it in like one day. And then the next book that I read was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Listen, I'm gonna be biased because Ali Hazelwood is now my Asian sister. But even before we connected, I always really enjoyed her contemporary romance novels, so I was really interested in seeing how she would tackle this paranormal romance. This is basically about a marriage formed as an alliance between a vampire bride and an alpha werewolf. And of course, they actually genuinely do fall in love along the way. Their marriage is essentially just to keep the peace between the vampires and werewolves because ever since the Twilight days, there has just been so much tension between these two. There is nodding involved because there is just like a sprinkle of Omegaverse in this book. I was excited to see how Ali would tackle Omegaverse, but I actually found that there wasn't that much. But you do get a nodding scene, and at least we have that. What's so funny is that later on, when my non-internet friends were reading this book, they are not familiar with the Omegaverse. So they read it and they were like, wait, what's nodding? It just really goes to show that Ali Hazelwood is an educator in so many ways. Like, she truly is a STEMinist because not only is she teaching you about STEM, but she's also teaching you about the Omegaverse. And maybe that's why we haven't really dived fully into the Omegaverse, because we gotta take baby steps before mainstream publishing is ready for it. But I just want Ali to know I'm ready for it all. I thought it was super fun to see something different from her, but at the same time, I could really tell that this was still in her voice. Because I think if you've read her other books, she has a very distinct sense of humor and sense of writing style. And it was really interesting to see how even in this paranormal setting with a main character who is very different from the other main characters she's written before, you still have the same kind of humor and writing style that you have loved before in her previous books, but now just translated into a different genre. And it is still quite very romance heavy. I would say it is not as heavy with the plot, but that's okay because what are we here for? A plot that doesn't involve nodding? Get out of here. She truly has the range. Haters cannot believe it, and that's not with a K-N-O-T. After that, I also read Against the Loveless World. This is a literary novel about a young Palestinian refugee. You start off with seeing her be a political prisoner, but then you also get flashbacks to her story before she got sent to prison and how she slowly becomes radicalized while searching for a better life for her family in the Middle East. This is a book where I felt like I wasn't reading a book. I felt like I was experiencing a real life story of a real person. Because when you see her in the beginning of the book, she's been locked away in solitary confinement, but then she is reflecting on all of the events that have led her to this point. And it really feels like you're going through an entire life journey with her, from when she was young and had all these dreams about falling in love, raising a family, opening her own business, and then obviously seeing those dreams crumble to dust and seeing her have to deal with poverty and prostitution and becoming a refugee because the US invaded Iraq. You see this fictional character who, despite being fictional, represents the lives of so many people, and she feels real at the same time. Like, she isn't diluted into just a victim character. She has so much spark and bite to her. Like, she has truly been through so much. You see her constantly face exile, and there's like this recurring theme throughout the book about how you can't really lay down your roots anywhere. And even when you finally manage to make a home for yourself, all over again because of war or genocide or some other BS political event, you are now being chased away from the place that you thought would be your home. I definitely understand why this book won an award, because it just felt so human and real and raw. I'll read out loud some quotes that I highlighted. I don't see how anyone else can survive colonialism. Understanding our own condition, I think in saying loved each other, Baldwin doesn't just mean the living. To survive by loving each other means to love our ancestors too, to know their pain, struggles, and joys. It means to love our collective memory, who we are, where we come from. And then the 9th book that I read is The Marble Queen. This is a young adult sapphic fantasy romance graphic novel. It follows another marriage of alliance, but sorry to Allie Hazelwood, but this one is God's sword lesbians. So unfortunately, the Omegaverse will have to take a seat for that. So the main character is a princess who accepts this marriage in order to save her kingdom. But what she doesn't expect is that the marriage is not to the prince that she met, but actually to the prince's sister, who has recently been coronated as the queen. There is some political drama that goes on in this book, but I did feel like the plot was very light and surface level. I still thought it was cute, and I think even on the surface level, it was just nice to see very beautiful women kissing. And I feel like the story really could have been better if it wasn't so rushed, because this story felt like it should have been spread across like 7 volumes, but instead it was just squeezed together into one book. And so when you get to big plot points, like a major character dies and everyone's like grieving over it, it doesn't really give you time to like be shocked or grieve over it, because it happens so quickly and then the characters have to move on to the next thing. So I really think that this book should have had more time to fully develop the story. I would argue even the artwork too. Like, the cover is so beautiful, but a lot of the interior pages would have the very pretty lesbian characters. Yes, love that. But like the background would just have like a solid color, so you wouldn't really get a sense of the setting when, you know, in a fantasy world, there's so many rich settings that you could draw. So I do wish the book had more time to kind of like breathe and develop a little bit, but I still thought it was cute and very quick to read. And then the last book that I read was Haunting Adeline. And this was a book that I didn't even plan on reading. One of my subscribers has sent me this book, and I will dedicate a separate video to talk about this book more in detail, because that is what they wanted me to do. But to kind of gloss it over for this video, it's basically a dark romance book about a stalker slash hacker slash vigilante that tracks down traffickers and kills them because he cares about children and women, but not so much that he listens to consent. He becomes so obsessed with the main character of this book, and she just gets stalked by him, but then she realizes she's like really into that. And the whole book is basically about 2 perverts playing kinky hide and seek. I'm pretty sure they don't actually know how trafficking works, because the way that the writing describes the trafficking victims makes it seem like it's just little old Susie who got snatched up on the street, instead of like the actual realities of trafficking. So I just think it's weird that like we're trying to pit this love interest as this hero who cares so much about these children, and he cares very deeply about the global issues of humans being trafficked, but we're like not doing the due diligence of showing any care to trafficking victims, because the situations are depicted in such like a cartoonish way. But other than that, the shit was goofy as hell. I know that a lot of people had warned me that, you know, it's like triggering. There were some people who even had to drop it because like it was too much for them. I think I can just pretty much read anything at this point, because I'm reading this and I'm like, I don't find this triggering, but I do find it corny as fuck. Like, there are just so many lines where I was like, is this a joke? Are we even taking this shit seriously at this point? Or are we just like typing the story with one hand and just saying fuck all? So I highlighted a bunch of the quotes that I will be reading out loud in a future video, but I probably won't be able to get to it till June because I'm traveling this month. I need time to put together my notes because there are quite a lot of highlights to get through. Like, look at how thick this book is. And you know what? It never needed to be that thick. It never needed to be that serious. And I can't believe that despite 600 pages of the same repetitive bullshit, that this is only book 1. But you know what? I survived book 1. Maybe I'll give book 2 a shot and we can keep this wacky ass roller coaster going, I guess. All right, I will see you later then. Goodbye.